Megan had always believed that treating people with kindness was the only way to live, and that principle had been drilled into her from the very start of her life. It was not that she sought out trouble or wished to cause any disturbances. Rather, she believed that simply showing up, doing her job well, and extending genuine courtesy to every customer was enough. For Megan, the simple creed of working hard, respecting others, and keeping her head down in times of trouble was both a guiding light and a personal mandate. Yet, as she was about to learn in a way that would forever change her life, sometimes doing the right thing carried unforeseen consequences. For almost 3 years, Lancaster Grill had been more than just a workplace for Megan. It had been her second home. Nestled on the east side of Columbus, Ohio, the diner was hardly fancy. Tucked between a gas station and a laundromat, the modest establishment was the kind of place where truckers would stop for a strong cup of coffee, families would gather for a hearty Sunday breakfast, and the waitstaff knew each customer's order before they even learned their name. It was a job that many took for granted, with long hours, meager pay, and management that rarely seemed to care. Yet Megan remained there, steadfast and reliable, driven by the need to pay her bills, support her high rent on a tiny one-bedroom apartment, and help her younger brother Evan as he navigated his second year of college. Evan never knew that behind his textbooks and groceries was a sacrifice Megan made without complaint, sending him a little extra money whenever their mother could not provide. This dedication was the reason Megan often accepted double shifts and endured the daily indignities of the job, even when it meant dealing with customers who barely glanced her way or co-workers who treated kindness as a weakness. Megan had witnessed many unpleasant things during her time at Lancaster Grill. There was Beth, a senior waitress who treated some customers as if they were invisible, while laughing and flirting with others without a care. Then there was Jason, a newer server who deliberately avoided certain tables altogether, as if the look or uniform of a customer determined the quality of service they would receive. In this small diner, the entire atmosphere shifted depending on who walked in. A well-dressed businessman would be greeted with warm smiles and engaging conversation, whereas a working-class customer sporting a paint-stained uniform was met with rushed service and curt dismissals. Worse still, some of the staff seemed to believe that if a customer appeared unlikely to tip well, they were not worth any effort at all. Megan detested these practices, but she had learned long ago that speaking out against them was not an option. A few months earlier, after noticing a table that had been left waiting too long, Megan had made a simple, offhand comment to point out the delay. Instead of receiving understanding, Beth had fixed her with a cold stare and said, "You don't get paid extra for being a saint, Megan." That remark was a clear message: either go along with the system or keep quiet. Megan had chosen to remain silent until one fateful evening changed everything. It was a slow Wednesday night at Lancaster Grill, a night that Megan, despite the ordinary pace, would never forget. Fewer customers meant fewer complaints, fewer spills, and fewer forced smiles from her co-workers who only became charming when it suited them. Standing at the counter, Megan refilled the sugar dispensers when the bell above the door jingled. In walked an older black gentleman, his clothes neat yet slightly worn. Nothing extravagant, just a simple button-up shirt and slacks. He carried himself with a quiet confidence, and there was something in the way he took a deliberate pause to scan the room that caught Megan's attention. She recognized that hesitation immediately. It was the kind of look that often appeared on the faces of customers who already knew what sort of welcome to expect. Almost instantly, the response from her co-workers confirmed her suspicions. Beth, leaning casually against the counter, did not even bother to look up from her phone, and Jason, who had been laughing with a fellow server near the drink station, merely exchanged a fleeting glance with the newcomer before resuming his conversation. No greeting, no acknowledgement, a silence that spoke volumes. Megan felt the oppressive weight of that silence settle around her. There was no accident in it. Her co-workers had consciously chosen not to extend the courtesy the customer deserved. For a moment, Megan considered keeping her head down and avoiding any confrontation, as she had done many times before. Yet as she glanced back at the man, the way he stood, silently daring them to prove him wrong just this once, Megan made a decision. Wiping her hands on a napkin, she grabbed a menu and strode directly over to him. "Good evening, sir," she said in a warm but steady tone. "Just you tonight?" The man met her gaze, and in that moment something softened in his expression. "Yes, ma'am," he replied evenly. Megan smiled and gestured toward an open booth by the window. "Follow me." Is that booth acceptable to you? Perfectly fine, he said, settling into the seat with a quiet assurance. Megan handed him a menu and, reaching behind her ear, produced a pen. May I start you off with something to drink? She inquired. Coffee, he responded. Black. Without hesitation, Megan moved quickly, retrieving a fresh pot of coffee and pouring a cup herself. Even as she sensed Beth's eyes boring into her back and Jason's gaze lingering, she refused to look over her shoulder. Instead, she focused solely on serving the gentleman. Once the coffee was set down in front of him, the man glanced around the restaurant and then back at her. You're the only one working tonight, he said in a low voice, one that only she could hear. Megan understood his implication immediately. She shifted her gaze toward the others, where Beth was now whispering something to Jason, both of them struggling to hide their smirks. Feels like it sometimes, she murmured, prompting a small chuckle from him as he flipped open the menu to scan the options. What's good here? He asked, raising an eyebrow in inquiry. Megan tilted her head thoughtfully and replied, It depends on what you're in the mood for. If you want something hearty, our pot roast is made fresh. But if you prefer something lighter, my personal favorite is the grilled salmon. The man's eyebrow arched further. That's so? He questioned. Megan nodded confidently. I promise you won't regret it. A small, genuine smile spread across his face as he said, Salmon it is. Megan jotted down his order with practiced ease and returned to the kitchen. However, as she passed by, she caught a barely audible mutter from Beth. She's wasting her time. Megan's jaw clenched, but she continued on without a backward glance. By the time she returned with a fresh refill of coffee, she sensed that the atmosphere had subtly shifted. Beth's eyes had narrowed perceptibly, and Jason kept stealing glances toward the booth, as if waiting for Megan to falter or say something off-limits. Even Tom, the manager, had peeked out from his office to scan the room before disappearing again. An unsettling feeling gripped Megan, a premonition that she had unwittingly made herself a target. Yet she couldn't know the full extent of the backlash until the next morning. That night, sleep had eluded her. Each time she closed her eyes, she recalled the way Beth had muttered under her breath, the way Jason had smirked, and the furtive look Tom had given her, despite her inner reassurance that she had done nothing wrong. Indeed, she had simply performed her duty as a waitress. Her stomach churned with unease. So when the morning came and Megan pulled into the Lancaster Grill parking lot, the air was crisp and the sun was only just beginning to reveal itself above the skyline. Grabbing her apron from the passenger seat and draping it over her shoulder, she noted that a few cars, including Tom's, were already parked in the lot. Stepping into the diner, Megan expected to see the usual sight: Beth and Jason chatting idly at the counter, the kitchen crew busily prepping for the morning shift, and the soft hum of the radio filling the background. Instead, something felt off. Beth was not casually leaning against the counter as she usually did, and Jason was not busy making coffee or cracking his customary jokes with the line cooks. Rather, both of them were standing rigidly, eyes fixed on Megan. Beth's face wore a sly, knowing smile, while Jason's arms remained crossed in a posture of silent judgment. As Megan's grip on her apron tightened, the sound of a door creaking open announced the arrival of Tom. He emerged from his office, his gaze fixed on her, as if he had been waiting for this very moment. Megan, Tom said flatly, his voice devoid of warmth. Come with me. A cold pit formed in her stomach as she obeyed. Without a word, Tom turned and led her to the back of the diner. Along the way, Megan could still sense Beth and Jason's eyes burning into her back. She swallowed hard, steeling herself for what lay ahead, and followed him into a cramped office whose desk was cluttered with paperwork and smeared with old coffee stains. A file lay open before Tom, yet he did not seem to be reading it. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly, and finally spoke the words that struck her like a physical blow. We're letting you go. Those 3 words hit Megan with the force of a slap. Her mind raced, trying to understand what she had just heard. Tom's face remained impassive, his expression unreadable. It's not working out, he repeated in a monotone. Megan's heart pounded in her chest as she fought to make sense of the situation. Not working out, she echoed, incredulously. With a short, humorless laugh that belied her inner turmoil, she retorted, I've been here for almost 3 years. I've never missed a shift, and I've never been late. Tom merely exhaled through his nose, as if weary from this very conversation. It's a decision we've made. he stated flatly. Megan knew immediately what he meant, and her throat tightened with a mix of humiliation and disbelief. "This is because of last night, isn't it?" she ventured softly, her voice barely audible. Tom did not confirm with words. His silence was all the confirmation she needed. Heat crept into her cheeks as the realization sank in. She was being fired for doing her job, for treating a customer with kindness. Tom's fingers tapped restlessly against the desk as he continued, "You can collect your final paycheck next week." There was nothing more to say. No warning, no explanation, just the stark reality that she was being cast aside. Megan clenched her fists, knowing that arguing would be futile. Slowly she untied her apron and placed it on a chair before turning to leave. At the door she paused and looked back at Tom, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "You know this isn't right," she said. Tom remained unmoved, his expression as impassive as ever. With one last shake of her head, Megan stepped out of the office and back into the main dining area. Beth stood near the counter with a self-satisfied expression, and Jason pretended to wipe down a table while the glint of satisfaction in his eyes was impossible to ignore. They had been waiting for this moment. Megan's face burned with a mix of anger and humiliation. Anger at the injustice of it all, and humiliation at the satisfaction her co-workers seemed to derive from her misfortune. Yet, despite the burning desire to lash out, to confront them and demand an explanation, she held her tongue. She would not give them the satisfaction of a scene. Lifting her chin high, Megan walked past them in silence and pushed through the diner's doors into the cold, unforgiving morning air. For the first time in 3 years she found herself without a job, without a paycheck, and without a backup plan. Climbing into her car, she slammed the door shut and gripped the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Questions flooded her mind. How was she going to pay rent? How would she help Evan with his groceries? How would she ever recover from this blow? As if on cue, her phone buzzed in the silence of the car. At first, she ignored it, her thoughts lost in a spiral of despair. But soon, she glanced at the screen and saw an unknown number flashing. Hesitating for a moment, she answered with a shaky, "Hello?" On the other end of the line came a deep, steady, and familiar voice. "Megan, this is Richard Lawson." Megan frowned in confusion. "I'm sorry, who is this?" she asked, her heart skipping a beat. The voice continued, "The man you served last night at Lancaster Grill." Suddenly, Megan's breath caught in her throat as she straightened in her seat. "Oh, yes, sir. How can I help you?" she managed to say, though her voice trembled. After a brief pause, Richard's tone took on a weightier note. "I heard what happened," he said. Megan's stomach churned as the implication of his words settled in. News travelled fast in a place like Lancaster Grill. "Of course," she replied with a bitter laugh. "I guess I should have just ignored you like everyone else." Then came the words that made her freeze. "That's exactly why I'm calling," Richard said firmly, "because this isn't the end of your story, it's only the beginning." Megan's grip on the phone tightened as her mind struggled to process his words. She had always assumed Richard Lawson was just another customer, a man who happened to stop by for dinner. But now, as his tone grew more deliberate, it became clear that there was something more. "I'm sorry, what do you mean?" she asked, her voice catching in her throat. There was another pause, and then Richard's voice, calm and measured, filled the silence. "I wasn't there merely for dinner last night, Megan. I was there to observe how my employees treat people." Megan blinked in astonishment. "Your employees?" she repeated in disbelief. "I don't understand." "Let me make it simple," Richard said slowly. "I own Lancaster Grill, and last night I visited the restaurant unannounced, as a regular customer, to learn the truth about how the establishment was being run." Megan's mind raced as she tried to absorb his words. You own this place?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Richard replied simply. "I come in without any formal inspections or warnings, just to see how my business is truly operating." He continued, "I wanted to determine whether the issues were merely about poor service or if they went deeper." There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line before he asked, "How long have you worked at Lancaster Grill?" "Almost 3 years, Megan answered, her voice tinged with both pride and resignation. "I've never missed a shift. I've never been late. I always do my job and treat people like human beings." she exhaled slowly, frustration seeping into her tone. And apparently that was enough for them to fire me. That's exactly why I'm calling, Richard said. I let them fire you on purpose. Megan's heart sank. You? What? You let them throw me out just to see what would happen? She stammered. Richard's reply was measured but firm. I needed to see if this was about bad service or something deeper. And now I know exactly who I cannot trust to run my business. Megan's pulse pounded in her ears as she asked, And what does that mean for me? There was a brief pause before Richard's tone shifted, becoming both authoritative and resolute. It means I need someone I can trust, he declared. I need someone who understands what it means to run a restaurant fairly, a person who does not pick and choose who receives dignity based solely on appearance or background. Megan's brow furrowed as she tried to comprehend the implications of his words. I still don't see what this has to do with me, she replied. Richard's next words were unequivocal and stopped her cold. I want you to come back, Megan, this time as the new manager. For a long moment Megan sat in stunned silence, her mind reeling from the shock of it all. What? You're saying you fired my manager? She finally managed to ask. Yes, exactly what you heard, Richard confirmed. I terminated your manager, Tom, this very morning. The shock was nearly too much to bear. Beth and Jason, who had always seemed to relish in her misfortune, would now have to face consequences they never imagined. Richard continued. I understand this is sudden, but I have no interest in having anyone else run my business. You know what matters in a workplace, how people are treated, the integrity of service? That is exactly what Lancaster Grill needs. Megan swallowed hard, her mind reeling as she processed the transformation. Less than 24 hours ago she had been dismissed without warning. Now she was being offered the position of the very person who had been responsible for her firing. She took a deep breath and asked hesitantly, What do you say? Richard's tone brooked no argument. Yes, you can do this, he said firmly, and you should. Megan stared out the windshield, her thoughts spinning as she tried to reconcile the dramatic turn of events. The echoes of Beth's mocking voice, Jason's smug silence, and Tom's dismissive tone still haunted her. They had counted her out, convinced they had rid themselves of her for good. But now, here was a chance to be the change that they had never anticipated. A chance to prove that integrity and hard work could indeed alter the course of a business. With a determined lift of her chin and a final, resolute grip on the phone, Megan replied, I'll do it. Richard exhaled a satisfied breath. Good. Come in tomorrow morning. You start at 8. Megan nodded, even though he could not see her, and hung up the phone. For a few long, silent moments she sat there, gripping the steering wheel as the enormity of what had just occurred sank in. Less than a day ago she had walked out of Lancaster Grill with nothing. Today she would return as the boss, and she had no intention of playing nice any longer. Megan stepped out of her car and stood in the chill of the early morning, clutching the strap of her bag tightly. The air was sharp, slicing through her clothes as if to remind her that nothing in life came easily. She had spent the entire night wrestling with her thoughts, the memory of being dismissed still fresh and painful. But now the thought of returning to Lancaster Grill filled her with a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to claim the power and respect that had been so long denied to her. Yesterday she had left the building with no job, no explanation, and no respect. Today she was about to return with something that Beth, Jason, and even Tom could never have imagined. Real authority. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Megan pushed open the heavy door of Lancaster Grill. Immediately the familiar aroma of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon greeted her, a comforting reminder of what this place once meant to her. Inside, customers were scattered throughout the booths, the clinking of forks against plates blending with the soft hum of conversation and the distant melody of the radio. For a few moments, no one noticed her return. Then, as if on cue, Beth turned from behind the counter and froze at the sight of Megan. Jason, who had been laughing with a busboy, caught sight of her as well, the sound of his laughter cutting off mid-sentence. In that instant, a flicker of confusion and unease passed across his face, as if he had suddenly realized that something was terribly amiss. Megan allowed the moment to stretch just a little longer, savoring the discomfort that now rippled through the room. With deliberate calm, she walked toward the counter, setting her bag down with an air of quiet authority. Beth was the first to recover from her shock, scoffing as she crossed her arms. "What the hell are you doing here?" she demanded. Megan simply tilted her head and replied evenly, "You'll find out soon enough." Beth's smirk faltered, and before she could say anything further, a door at the back of the restaurant creaked open. Tom emerged from his office, visibly irritated as he flipped through a stack of papers. "Beth, I need you to," he began, but then froze as his eyes landed on Megan. His entire posture went rigid, and he glanced at Beth and then at Jason, as if desperately trying to piece together what was happening. "Megan," Tom said slowly, his tone measured yet heavy with unspoken meaning. "You don't work here anymore." Megan offered a small, ironic smile devoid of any warmth. "Actually, I do," she declared. At that moment, another voice cut in from behind her, firm and authoritative. "I believe I can clarify that." Every head in the room turned as Richard Lawson stepped forward, calm and collected in a tailored coat with his hands casually tucked into his pockets. He took his time scanning the space, before fixing his gaze on Tom, then on Beth, whose face drained of color, and finally on Jason, who looked as though he wished he could vanish from the room. Tom opened his mouth, then closed it abruptly. Richard stepped closer, stopping beside Megan, and turned to address the entire staff. "As of this morning," he began in a voice that carried both authority and resolve, "Lancaster Grill has undergone a management change. Effective immediately, Tom, your position is terminated." Beth gasped, and Jason's expression faltered as if he had been punched. Tom's face flushed an ugly shade of red, and before he could protest, Richard interjected sharply, "I've already heard enough from you." Tom's mouth snapped shut in defeat. Then Richard's gaze shifted back to the rest of the staff. "Some of you may be wondering what is happening," he said, allowing his words to settle in the thick silence of the room. "Let me put it simply. Last night, I visited this restaurant as a regular customer, and what I witnessed was utterly unacceptable. Not one person dared to speak up, not one person acted with the integrity that this establishment should represent." Richard gestured toward Megan. "This woman," he said, "was the only employee who treated me with respect. She was the only one who did her job the way it should be done." His expression hardened as he continued, "As for the rest of you, some of you ignored me completely, and some of you made it abundantly clear that you had no interest in serving every customer fairly. That ends today." A heavy silence fell over the room. Richard then turned back to Megan. "Megan, you are now the new manager of Lancaster Grill." At those words, Beth's mouth dropped open in disbelief, Jason's jaw clenched, and even the busboy near the kitchen seemed on the verge of applause. Megan allowed herself a small smile as she faced Beth and Jason, who were still reeling from the sudden turn of events. Leaning casually against the counter, she said lightly, "Well, this is awkward." Beth's expression twisted with anger as she turned to Richard, her voice sharp and accusatory. "You can't be serious." Richard's tone was unwavering. "Oh, I am very serious," he replied. "If you do not like it, you are free to leave." Beth's retort was cut short, as she realized that leaving would mean forfeiting her paycheck, a luxury she could not afford. Jason, on the other hand, hesitated, his mouth opening and closing as if calculating his next move. "This is," he began, only to be interrupted once more by Richard's steely voice. "You are welcome to quit as well." Jason froze, his eyes darting around the room as if seeking an escape. Beth glared daggers at Megan, but Megan simply smiled in response, as if to say that change was inevitable. "Looks like we all have a lot of adjusting to do," Megan said in a light yet firm tone. "So, let's get to work." In the days that followed, Megan watched as Lancaster Grill slowly transformed. She observed Beth storming off to the coffee machine with angry mutterings under her breath, while Jason methodically wiped down tables with a stiffness that betrayed his inner turmoil. Even the busboy, Noah Cullish, a college student working nights to pay for school, approached her one evening as she was tidying up behind the counter. "You really got rid of Tom for that?" Noah asked cautiously, his voice low. "I mean, we all knew it happened, but I didn't think anyone would actually care." Megan set the rag down and looked him straight in the eye. "I care," she said firmly. Noah hesitated, then nodded, as if reassured by her conviction. Gradually, the energy at Lancaster Grill began to shift. The unwritten rules of who deserved good service and who did not were finally being challenged. Customers who had once been ignored now found themselves greeted warmly and treated with genuine respect. Regular patrons, who had long maintained a reserved silence, started opening up, sharing their days and leaving generous tips. Even the staff, initially skeptical of the change, began to follow Megan's lead. In time, the atmosphere grew lighter. The tension that had once suffused every corner of the diner began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of purpose and fairness. One afternoon, as Megan balanced invoices behind the counter, she heard Richard's familiar voice. "How's my investment doing?" he inquired, causing her to set aside the paperwork with a small, confident smirk. "I think we're in good shape," she replied. Richard glanced around at the bustling restaurant, a place now alive with purpose and genuine smiles, not merely the pretense of service, and nodded in satisfaction. "Told you you'd be fine," he remarked. Megan leaned casually against the counter, acknowledging the irony of the situation. "You didn't exactly give me a choice, did you?" she said with a wry chuckle. "No, you didn't," Richard responded, his tone light yet firm. "And honestly, sometimes doing the right thing isn't about having a choice, it's about making the choice, even when it costs you everything." For the longest time, Megan had viewed her job at Lancaster Grill as nothing more than a means to pay the bills, a job with long hours and little reward beyond a meager paycheck. But now, as she stood in the heart of a restaurant that was slowly transforming under her guidance, she realized that it was something much more. It was a platform for change, a place where the principles of fairness and respect could triumph over prejudice and indifference. In that moment, she understood that doing what was right sometimes meant sacrificing comfort, but it also opened the door to opportunities far greater than she had ever imagined. Reflecting on that fateful morning when she had left Lancaster Grill with nothing but a heavy heart and a determined spirit, Megan could hardly believe how quickly her life had changed. Within 24 hours, she had been given a chance to reclaim not only her job, but also her dignity. She was no longer just another waitress. She was now the person in charge, the one who would ensure that Lancaster Grill never again succumbed to the old ways of favoritism and neglect. Every detail, every action, and every word had led to this pivotal moment. It was as if the universe had conspired to reward her integrity with a second chance, a chance to make things right, to be the leader that the restaurant desperately needed. Standing once more at the entrance of Lancaster Grill, Megan took a deep breath and let the cool morning air fill her lungs. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon enveloped her, mingling with the murmurs of satisfied customers and the clatter of dishes. It was a scene she knew well, yet now it held a promise of transformation and hope. The diner was no longer merely a place of routine. It had become a battleground for integrity, where each smile and each kind gesture was a small act of defiance against a system that had once rewarded indifference. As the day unfolded, Megan moved through the restaurant with an air of quiet authority. Every decision she made was guided by the simple principles she had always held dear: work hard, respect others, and never compromise on kindness. With every new interaction, whether it was a reassuring word to a hesitant server or a thoughtful suggestion to a customer, she was gradually reshaping not just the routine operations of Lancaster Grill, but also the hearts and minds of those around her. By the end of the day, as the sun dipped low and the last customers prepared to leave, the transformation was evident. The staff, once divided and embittered, now moved together with a sense of camaraderie and renewed purpose. The unspoken prejudices that had long defined the service were slowly being replaced by an openness to change and a commitment to fairness. And standing in the center of it all was Megan, whose unwavering belief in treating people with respect had sparked this evolution.